We are now advanced in C-sections to the point where you can even have a cesarean in the United States if you're not pregnant. Can you imagine a scenario where you could have a cesarean and not be pregnant? I will explain. And I couldn't have thought this up. This sounds like science fiction to me. But it was, I participate on an American Obstetricians e-list, you know. So they talk about cases, and I hide there. They forget I'm there. And so they speak freely. And one of them put up a disturbing news report from North Carolina that said C-section for woman not pregnant. And it went on the television, but just locally, it didn't become national news. 7 different obstetricians had examined the woman at some point. I mean, and the, okay, so, and then one of the older ones said impacted feces, he thought was the reason. Poop. They used an ultrasound and they looked at poop and they called it a pregnancy. Early, yeah. I mean, that's not a very good mistake to make. But you could check, you know, you could use your hands, but they don't, the Americans don't do this anymore because they think, why would you touch a pregnant woman that you didn't know her, it would take time and you'd have to learn how. And when you can look inside her, it's so much more direct. The problem is, as I'm sure most of you know, you can make ultrasound mistakes all the time, they make them. But it doesn't say so in the textbook, you know. So probably everybody here knows somebody, they said, oh, we're having the boy, we're having the boy, we're having the boy. It said so on the ultrasound, and it was wrong, because it wasn't a penis at all, it was just a shadow or something. And the other case can happen. Or our baby's going to be, you know, 4 kilo, and it's 3, you know, they can make these mistakes. Or the baby should be born in June, and, you know.
Or there are 2, and it's
or there are 2, and there's only 1. Yeah, so you have these just really wild mistakes that should tell anybody who's thinking that ultrasound, while it can diagnose things, should not be the last word. So while I too use it sometimes, I continue to say the hands are more important. And you should be able to function without it. Like, what if you're on a ferry boat and there's a baby happening? You know, your hands shouldn't be idiots. But in this case, they didn't touch the woman. And when she came in for her next prenatal visit, they went, oh, we can't find the heartbeat. Oh, dear, the baby died. Now, that wouldn't have been a big deal 30 years ago, but if a baby died so early in pregnancy, everybody would know, you don't induce a labor, you wait. Nature takes care of it. Nature will recognize that the woman's body will recognize the baby's not living, the hormones will change, the cervix will ripen, and there will be a spontaneous expulsion of the baby, there will be a little labor, and then the woman's period will return, and so forth. But not now. It's like, I think they thought it was just too horrible that something died inside the woman. Well, ridiculous, yeah, but they then said, okay, let's induce the labor. So how do you induce a labor when a woman's not pregnant? It's really very, very difficult. In fact, it's impossible. So she lay on the bed, they did the IV, she couldn't eat, all of this, you know, very strange scenario, nobody putting their hands on her at any point. And then they went 4 days later, they thought, okay, let's just have a C-section. So now the head of the department, the top professor of all, the director of the maternity department, opened the woman and went, surprise, there's no pregnancy. And that went in the papers. She had to talk about it on television. She was very embarrassed. She left town. and got a job in someplace else. So I thought, what an extraordinary demonstration of ignorance that we've seen here. And soon after I found that story and looked at it, I was invited by the head of maternal fetal medicine at a big hospital in New Jersey to speak. Very nice woman. And I think, you know, on the whole, a pretty well-trained obstetrician. Mostly educated in India and Canada. So the night before I was to talk to her residents, the student doctors, she invited me to dinner at a nice restaurant, and I was sitting here and she was sitting at the other end of the table, and staff members were on both sides. And I told that story. And she said, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you this. And I thought, oh my God, what have I stepped in here? And she said, but 2 weeks ago I almost did a cesarean on a woman who wasn't pregnant. And then, well, since it was an embarrassing topic, I decided to change the subject. And the next morning after I talked to her residents, I thought, I gave her credit that she palpated and she touched the woman before she cut. But I think that what she was embarrassed about was that why didn't her residents know? And I too was curious about that. So after the talk, I saw the big volume of the most trusted obstetrics textbook. And I have, my last copy of it was the 1980 edition. That's the one you'll see in the documentary. But there have been several editions since then, and they cost too much. I can't buy them, and you can't find them in a medical library anymore because the budgets are squeezing down. So I looked in the index, and it said nothing at all about a phantom pregnancy, a false pregnancy. And that's what the woman had, you see. It wasn't just that they saw poop. The woman thought she was pregnant. She had the big belly, she had the sensitive breasts, she had no period. And this can happen in, maybe 1 in 1,500, 2,000 births, something like that. And I read about it in the first little obstetrics textbook that I was given, and I diagnosed one of these when I had attended about 15 births. But I used my hands. And this woman thought she was pregnant. She had all of these symptoms, but I knew that I was supposed to feel a full uterus, which you can feel at 8 weeks. You probably, in a lot of women, you could feel it at 6. Yeah? And so I couldn't feel it. And I said to my friend, maybe it's because I'm new at this. I don't feel your uterus at all, although I see you have all these other symptoms. And at that time, you know, we didn't have home pregnancy tests. This was 1971. So I said, let's wait 3 weeks. If you're really pregnant, your uterus I'll certainly feel it. And I showed her in my little book, it said there's this thing called a false pregnancy. And I covered up the part that said usually the women who have it are psychotic. That can be true, but it is certainly not always true. And it was not true in this case. So she got her period. And then later she had 3 real pregnancies. So since then I told the story about the two women, the one that had the cesarean for the diagnosis, and the second one where the doctor figured it out first before she cut. And every time I told the story, I heard about another one, where they went ahead and they cut. You know, a teenager in New York City, the residents went ahead and diagnosed that she was pregnant and should be due, according to her estimated due date that had been figured out by all these experts. And they cut her open and she's not pregnant. And we have a whole generation, maybe even 2 in the United States, that don't have it. They don't know it's possible because it's not in the book. That's what I found out when I opened up and looked in the index. There was no entry anymore about a false pregnancy. And it used to be in the books prior to 1980. You can look in the obstetrics books and probably the midwifery books. I'd be really interested, Pia, to know what's in the Swedish literature. Because in the English literature, they would say in the 1800s, and, you know, when, it would say the most embarrassing thing you can do is say a woman's pregnant when she's not. Because it makes her sound crazy, you know? And so, we have to teach people, women can be pregnant and not know they're pregnant. Yeah? You can have a woman, even a woman who's had a baby before, can sometimes be pregnant and not know it. That seems very hard to believe for most of us, where the baby's kicking all over the place, and we can go, how is this possible? And yet, I know people, and they're not stupid, and they're not all big fat people either, you know? And it can happen with a teenager, yeah? Or it can happen with a woman who's 50 years old, and she thinks she's in menopause, and she's pregnant. And her mind says no, and then the baby comes out, and she goes, oh my God. And then the opposite can happen, as a woman can be sure she's pregnant and she's not. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with. Pregnancy in humans has got wide range of possibilities. How many in this room know somebody who's given birth to the first baby in less than an hour from when they went into labor? Here's one, yeah. You know one too. Yeah, where the whole labor was less than an hour for baby number one. I've known, you know, I know a few. And on the other hand, sometimes you have a woman giving birth to baby number one and it takes a week from when she says labor started. Well, that's, now, people that think that they're scientific about birth, they look for averages, or they'll look for the median, okay? And then they want everybody to do that. We want standardized birth, because that's what hospitals like. Let's make guidelines. Okay, so you can get some man at birth who doesn't know very much, and he'll make a graph, who's the scientific man, the mechanical man, he'll make a graph. Now, then they'll say, oh, they'll spread it all over the world. Now everybody has to behave like the graph or we're going to do something to you. We'll make your labor go faster. We know how. We can put hormones that were synthesized in the laboratory. We can make your labor happen in the daytime, so that we don't have too many births at night. That's what we do. That's what we do in the U.S. You know, they don't have very many births on Saturday and Sunday anymore, or on the big football day, or Christmas. And a lot of people are born just trying to get that New Year baby by C-section. That's meaningless. Yeah. So